right, residential sales contract. So we got page 1 of the residential sales contract. Pretty much the top part has remained the same. And then we get into the pricing paragraph, paragraph 2.
So you guys are familiar with paragraph 2 the way it's been. This isn't any different as far as 2A, B, C, or D, really. That's all been there. Sales price, down payment, buyer's loan amount. What's different now, and total financing. What's different now, subsidy was in there before, right? But they've added the very clear words, seller's net reduced by, right? That's there. So nobody's making any mistakes. It does reduce, of course, seller's net. And then seller payment towards buyer broker compensation. Also, seller's net is going to be reduced by that dollar amount or percentage. And so when you are writing your offer, just decide whether it's going to be actual dollar amount or a percentage. Typically, over the years, I've advised agents to go with percentages because if there's a change, when there's counters to the contract offer, you don't have to go back and change more than one thing with initial, right? This is important, the last line under 2E, important for us as a brokerage and for you all. It says this obligation is enforceable by buyer's brokerage against the seller and may be modified only by subsequent written agreement by buyer's brokerage. So we were always trained over the years that, the contract that was created with compensation, one of the foundations of the MLS from the very beginning was this unilateral offer of compensation from the listing brokerage to the buyer brokerage, broker to broker, binding offer of compensation, which can be enforced through realtor association arbitration if the listing company decides not to pay it or whatever. It was based on that offer in the MLS, and an actual legal contract was created thereby. But now, in other words, we're third-party beneficiaries. The real estate brokerages and agents are third-party beneficiaries to this contract, which is really principals are buyer and seller, of course. But they added this language to give it legal teeth, right? Third-party beneficiary. When we have a for sale by owner, we would always recommend using the separate Samson Properties non-agency for sale by owner commission agreement. In commercial, you don't do business without a commission agreement, right? And usually you want to have a separate commission agreement, brokerage to brokerage. But this transition now is it's clearly going to be in the purchase agreement right there, and it would be it wouldn't work well for a seller to come back later and try to say, well, I didn't understand it, or I'm not paying it. Even though we're not a party, we're a third-party beneficiary. So.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Yep.
And then the next change, moving on to paragraph 3, is in the EMD, the deposit paragraph, they changed. It used to be calendar days, and now it's business days. So if you put 3 days or 5 days in there for the earnest money to be delivered, it's business days versus calendar days, which makes it a little bit more relaxing for our buyer and us. So that's a very nice change.
Let me jump in real quick, just because I always like to say this on this subject, because we've got so many agents from across our footprint, so many that came from different brokerages which had a different policy on this. I strongly recommend that you make the EMD, you advise your buyer to have the EMD deposited with Samson Properties as the escrow agent rather than the title company. Obviously, Cardinal Title or most title companies, any title company will act in that capacity, and a lot of brokerages out there have trained their agents that that's their company policy, that you got to have the buyer designate the title company as the escrow agent for EMD, but that's not what we recommend, and that's because time and again, we've found over the years that in the event of a dispute over the release of EMD, when a deal falls out and a seller is angry at the buyer and they don't want to execute a release of the earnest money, even when they really should, because the contract was clear and the buyer had the right, either the contractual right or the statutory right. When the money is with Samson, we've got an option that's available to us that title companies don't have to get that money back to our buyer. And it's in the code in Maryland and in Virginia. And it doesn't always work, but it is one option that's available. It's a 15-day notice of intent to release escrowed funds. In Maryland, it's a 30-day notice. And oftentimes it has worked so that we can get our buyer clients' money out of escrow and you can move on and go buy another property. So.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Next on the docket is paragraph 8, Virginia Resale Disclosure Act. So the changes in here has now allowed us to put days in here in regards to the contingency for our buyers and in regards to our buyers for how much time they have to void a contract based on the review of the HOA or condo docs.
And for those of you who don't know, this came out last July, right? July 1, I believe. And this is Virginia, and the Virginia Resale Disclosure Act. This one paragraph is in place of what we used to have, two different paragraphs, one for POAs, HOAs, POAs, and one for condo. They rolled it together, so this act, this new law in Virginia applies across both HOAs and condos, right? But it's a big change in that, as Steve said, the buyer and seller can negotiate the time period for cancellation, buyer cancellation. And it used to be 3 days or up to 7 by way of an addendum. NVAR currently in their library has an addendum that allows the parties to extend that buyer cancellation period from 3 to 4 or to 5, 6, or a maximum of 7 days. Well, that's all going away, and it's open-ended. It obviously doesn't extend beyond the settlement date, never did, nor should it. But so if you're a buyer agent, you might want to put a number in there that's a little bit longer, right? Later. If you're a listing agent, don't be asleep at the wheel. You better fill that in. If it's left blank, though,
it defaults.
I think the
3
code.
days.
Yep, 3 days.
Defaults to 3 days. It can
Could be shorter.
It can.
Mm-hmm. It can't be. Well, obviously, if they're given to you before ratification, the buyer could pull their offer. Sometimes that happens, right? And this was always something that I got a lot of questions on, and I dealt with it myself with new home construction, where the builder gives you the package, but you don't get the ratified contract back with the vice president's signature on it for 10 days or whatever. The builder's staff would like for you to believe that the clock was ticking the moment they gave you the package. It's always been the cancellation right starts
Right.
as of ratification.
A quick note here from the NVAR printout. It says, if selecting 0 days, NVAR recommends providing the buyer with the form buyer's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences. So you can put 0 in, but make sure your buyer fully understands the ramifications of not being able to void based on the review of that package.
What that's zeroing in on, I think, is this question that's been out there, particularly over the last year, since there was a change in the code last July and the hyper-competitive market has continued. Mike, Steve, can my buyer waive their cancellation right? That's been a hot, controversial question. issue. And I don't like to promote that because I don't want our buyers waiving. And it used to be in the law, it was very clear, it couldn't be waived by agreement. The buyer and a buyer agent might attempt to do so to be more competitive in a hyper-competitive thing, but it was not legally binding on the buyer. Well, now it is, and that's why they're saying if you put 0, meaning we're effectively waiving, right? Have them sign buyer's acknowledgement of potential adverse consequences.
Yep.
How bad is that if we already have the docs? Exactly. The doc section of MLS?
I'm sorry, how bad?
How bad would that be to do that? Put 0. If they already have.
So the question was how bad it would be for the listing agent, or to put 0 if they're already, well, right, if you're a buyer, if the docs are provided to you ahead of time and you're comfortable with them, put 0, right? I think that was the question, if you're comfortable with them.
Another new paragraph added to our sales contract is paragraph 22, which is the broker compensation paragraph. Just says that the parties irrevocably instruct.
Irrevocably?
Yeah, thank you. Instruct settlement agent to pay broker compensation at settlement as set forth in parties' respective brokerage representation agreements, right? So that's a change as well.